that. Unfortunately, I believe that the FBI does have a significant trust issue with members of Congress, and that's part of what we'll deal with the working group. And I would say that trust has only been made worse by the recently declassified Section 702 compliance report covering December 2019 through May of 2020. In that report, there was a number of concerning things that were brought forward. There was queries done inappropriately by the FBI on a local political party. And then secondarily, included in there was one specific instance of abuse involving multiple queries of a sitting member of Congress in the FBI's FISA databases. Buried in a footnote of the declassified assessment, this specific incident described as follows. Quote, an intelligence analyst with the FBI conducted multiple queries using only the name of a U.S. congressman. The 707 report describes the specific facts that led the analyst to conduct these queries. These queries retrieved unminimized FISA-acquired information, including Section 702 acquired products that were opened. FBI advised that no minimized FISA-acquired information was disseminated or used in any way. This was reviewed, obviously, by the National Security Division of the U.S. Department of Justice and ODNI, and based on what they reviewed, they found these queries to be wholly inappropriate, not compliant, and a violation because they were overly broad as constructed. I think that the report's characterization of this FBI analyst's action as a mere misunderstanding of querying procedures is indicative of the culture that the FBI has come to expect and even tolerate. It is also indicative of the FBI's continued failure to appreciate how the misuse of this authority is seen on Capitol Hill. And I want to make clear the FBI's inappropriate querying of a duly elected member of Congress is egregious and a violation not only that degrades the trust in FISA, but is viewed as a threat to the separation of powers. I have had the opportunity to review the classified summary of this violation, and it is my opinion that the member of Congress that was wrongfully queried multiple times solely by his name was in fact me. This careless abuse of this critical tool by the FBI is unfortunate. Ironically, I think it gives me a good opportunity and a unique perspective on what's wrong with the FBI and the problems that the FBI has. To highlight that, I would like to submit for the record a couple things. February 28th, 2023, Director Haynes and Attorney General Garland asked for a reauthorization from the Congress, but they go in to add that there needs to be rigorous and ongoing oversight of the FBI's 702 querying, specifically their collection decisions on U.S. person inquiries. And they will be evaluating and taking remedial action to address identified incidents of noncompliance by the FBI. I'd like to submit that for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Secondly, a letter was sent to you on February 15th, Director Wray, 2023, from Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona, and he talks about the declassified 2021 report detailing these continued abuses of 702. In there, he mentions that these instances should frighten every American, and Congress deserves an explanation for them. He additionally talks about these, quote, backdoor searches are a violation of the Fourth Amendment and cannot continue. I'd ask to submit that for the record.
Without objection.
Thirdly, article in Politico from March 1st titled DOJ Faces Bipartisan Foulniks or Army of Skeptics on FISA 702. In that article, again, referring to this declassified report on the inappropriate use of 702, it talks about, in a sign of, I'll quote here, in a sign of odd political bedfellows in the House who are pushing reforms, conservative Congressman Andy Biggs and progressive member Pramila Jayapal, both members of the Judiciary Committee, publicly vetted on the detail tucked in the footnote of the report. An FBI intelligence analyst improperly queried surveillance data on a U.S. member of the House. I'd ask to submit that for the record.
Without objection.
Lastly, the footnote that I mentioned that has been declassified states in there that the National Security Division of the U.S. Department of Justice and ODNI assessed, based on the facts and analysis of this FBI analyst, that these queries were not compliant because they were overly broad as constructed. I'd like to submit that for the record.
Without objection.
The bottom line is 702 deserves to be reauthorized because it's an invaluable tool to our efforts to counter the threats of our adversaries. But the FISA working group must and will pursue reforms and safeguards through this reauthorization process. To help explain to the public why 702 should be reauthorized, I have a few questions for our other panelists. Director Haynes, why do we need 702 to specifically counter China?
Thank you, Representative. Specifically with respect to China, there are a number of ways in which 702 is crucial. It's crucial in the context of counterintelligence, where we are looking at where it is that China's efforts to send spies into the United States maybe, and what their planning is in relation to it. It is crucial in the context of threats to our to U.S. victims and to critical infrastructure through cyber, as we've all indicated. It's crucial to understanding a whole range of issues because it is effectively the most sort of effective way for us to gather intelligence against non-U.S. persons outside of the United States.
Thank you. And Director Burns, what does 702 mean for the CIA's ability to counter China?
It's crucially important for all the reasons, sir, that Director Haynes just mentioned. It also enables us to focus on efforts to evade sanctions, to steal intellectual property, to obtain sensitive technologies as well. And so in all those areas, it's extremely important.
And Director Nakasone, can you quantify in some way how vital 702 is to the NSA's efforts to counter China? And I know you specifically referenced a number of incidents that in your speech in January.
I would quantify it, Congressman, by saying it is the number one authority that we need. I can go into closed session with regards to the specific areas where it is so important.
Thank you. And Director Barrier, as a consumer of the information obtained by 702, can you explain the value of this information in DNI's efforts to counter China?
Yes, I can. As an all-source intelligence agency, while we don't do FISA collection, we certainly benefit from the insights we get from that. We bake that into our all-source analysis to illuminate threats for the Department of Defense and the nation.
Thank you for that. In closing, I'm honored by Chairman Turner's selection as the chair of the FISA Working Group, and I'm energized to begin our bipartisan work with the Judiciary Committee and our Senate colleagues to reform and reauthorize this vital tool. I also look forward to working with all of you here before us today and request your cooperation in this endeavor. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Member Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again to our witnesses. My good friend from Illinois put a lot on the table there, much of which, unfortunately, I was not briefed on. So, Director Wray, I'd love to start just by giving you a minute or two to respond if you would like, but I'd like you to keep it to a minute or two if you would.
Obviously, there's a lot to say, so I'll be very brief. I completely understand Congressman LaHood's concerns and everything he read. The main point I would make for today's purposes is that all of those problems, and they are problems, all of those compliance violations, and they are violations, predate all of these reforms that I was trying to summarize. And so my hope is that we will be able to show by working with the working group how these reforms will prevent stuff like what you described from happening again in the future.
Thank you, Director Wray. I'm going to direct my next question to Director Haynes and Director Burns. We spend a lot of time thinking about the mechanics and tactics of what conflict with China would look like, and we don't spend a lot of time thinking about the economics of tension leading to ultimately conflict were that to occur. This is not current, but RAND did a study in which they estimated that Chinese GDP in the event of a conflict would contract by a staggering 25 to 35%. U.S. GDP could contract by 5 to 10% if there was conflict in the Taiwan Strait. So the perplexing thing here is this is a country that really the sole reason that it has been able to achieve the economic growth that it has, to the point where today it's on an aggregate basis the largest economy in the world, has been engagement with the world, licit engagement through trade and other things, and illicit engagement through the stealing of IP, the manipulation of currency rates over time, et cetera. So I wonder, two-part question, can you paint a picture of if tensions continue to be exacerbated, leading to a point where there is conflict, what that would look like for the global economy, for the Chinese economy, and most importantly, help me understand why a Chinese leader would risk the golden goose, essentially.
I'll start. So I think to your point, Representative, it is not our assessment that China wants to go to war. And that is something I think to start with. In other words, they are, we continue to assess that, for example, even with respect to Taiwan, that they would prefer to achieve unification through peaceful means as opposed to through a use of force. They nevertheless are utterly committed to unification. And I think that is the challenge. In other words, she has made it quite clear that that is something that has to happen. And as a consequence, if they believe that peaceful unification is not an option, then they are in the potential for actually trying to achieve it militarily, and they are certainly planning for that potential. And then in terms of the impact that it would have, I think, obviously it depends on what the conflict looks like. But to your point again, I think it's absolutely right that this is, any conflict is likely to have enormous economic implications. And one of the things that we have certainly looked at and that others, within the government, Treasury and Commerce and so on, have looked at is the implications with respect to Taiwan of a disruption of their materials, particularly their semiconductors. And we've, studies show that it would actually have an absolutely enormous implications for the global financial economy if there were disruption to Taiwan's semiconductor production. Because really, Taiwan, the semiconductors, the chips that come out of Taiwan are present in virtually every category of electronic devices around the world. Leave it at that.
Director, I know CIA conducts economic work and economic assessment, so I'd be interested in your view.
Sure, and I would just add two examples to what Director Haynes said in terms of the calculus of the Chinese leadership, both on Taiwan and in terms of its relationship with Russia. I think on Taiwan, well, as Director Haynes said, we don't see evidence today that she has made a decision to invade Taiwan. I would never underestimate the ambitions of the current Chinese leadership in that regard or their determination. I do think that nobody has watched more intently Vladimir Putin's experience in Ukraine than Xi Jinping has. And I think he's been sobered to some extent, at least it's our analysis, by the extent to which the West was able to maintain solidarity and absorb some short-term economic costs in the interest of imposing even greater long-term economic costs on Russia. That's something that President Xi has to weigh as he comes out of zero COVID, tries to restore Chinese economic growth, tries to engage with, the rest of the global economy. And I think that also, weighs in his decision about whether or not to supply lethal equipment to Russia. We see clear evidence that the Chinese leadership is considering that, not that it's made a decision, not that it's begun lethal shipments. But there again, I think that economic factor, as Director Haynes said, has to weigh significantly in the calculus of the Chinese leadership.
Do we believe that the Chinese leadership sufficiently appreciates, even were they to supply lethal weapons, that would have economic consequences? An awful lot of people around the world would be much more hesitant to do business with China. Do we believe that the leadership in Beijing understands how that is a first step towards, again, killing the golden goose that has allowed that country to grow economically?
I think the only thing that I would highlight, Congressman, is that I think it's been important that European leaders have spoken up on this issue as well, because I think for a long time the Chinese leadership has assumed that it could drive wedges between the United States and our European allies on an issue like this. I think the fact that several prominent European leaders have spoken out directly about this is a very important step.
Thank you. Second category of questions is on technology, and I want to be respectful of my colleagues' time, so I'm going to direct the questions to General Nakasone and General Barrier. I had the opportunity last week to visit CIA and see the work that's been done by the director in terms of technological innovation. Director Burns has made it a strategic priority. He hired somebody from the outside to be chief technology officer. The visit was amazing. This new chief technology officer cleared out offices, created an open floor space. There's free snacks. They're just missing a millennial playing the guitar to reproduce what you see in Palo Alto every day in the middle of CIA headquarters. So with that as context, what are you guys doing? I'll start with you, General Naxalny. What are you guys doing that is as tangible as what CIA has done to make sure that we are at the cutting edge of technological innovation?
One of the things we've done, Ranking Member, is look at different partners. This is the key piece of what we've learned from Russia, Ukraine. The private sector has been incredibly helpful in terms of where we need to go in being able to thwart what Russia has attempted to do in Ukraine. We've opened up a cyberspace collaboration center, an unclassified building where our analysts go to engage with the private sector and members of the defense industrial base to do two things. One is to provide information in the defense industrial base in terms of what is going on in the domain of cyberspace. Two is to also get information from what we're seeing out there. What are the new leads? What are the things that we have to be able to emphasize? The coming decade is certainly a decade where cyberspace will be dominant. One of the things that we believe is that we have to have those partnerships that are so critical.
General Barrier.
Congressman, our innovation engine is really fueled by this thing called Netopedia. This is where Netopedia, where companies can come in with great ideas on how they might be able to help the defense intelligence enterprise. We evaluate those ideas, we meet with those folks, and then we try to pull their ideas in. Our two major focus areas right now are AI and ML for our program called MARS, the Machine Assisted Analytic Rapid Repository System, which will revolutionize the way we do foundational military intelligence, really pulling in swaths of data to make that environment much richer for our analysts. And the other piece is really our MASN sensor modernization to be able to take all of those varieties of signals that are out there that are new and unique and be able to pull them into our MASN enterprise. That's the focus of DI.
Thank you. General Barrier, I appreciate that, and I'm glad you highlighted openness to outside companies that are not the traditional primes. I think that only gets you about a third of the way there, because I've just heard too many stories of innovative companies who just have no hope of navigating the acquisition process and authorities and everything else, even though they may have cutting edge technology far better than what would be. So I'm going to follow up with you on that and yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Winstrup.
Well, thank you, Chairman Turner, Ranking Member Hines, and all of you for being here today. Director Haynes, you cut right to it today about the challenges that we face as a nation, the threats that we have. Threats to our country are not new, but some of the forms of those threats are new. And I want to talk about that a little bit. The Chinese Communist Party is very assertive. They want to destabilize us as much as they can, and they're getting pretty good at it. So the growing concerns I have are the development of adversaries' biological weapons is of great concern to me, and also the flow of illicit fentanyl coming into our country, which even in a meeting with the Chinese ambassador, he admitted we sell the precursors. Those are legal products. You know, it's somebody else's problem after that. Well, it is our problem, and I do want to hold those accountable for these efforts to be held accountable at some point, and we've got to do a better job of that. And I think we need to address and invest in the resources we need to stop the scourge of this of fentanyl, illicit fentanyl, and also the creation of bioweapons is something we should be greatly concerned about, as with any weapon an adversary may carry. So it's our responsibility, I think, to really work together on these things as best we can. We had a panel a few weeks ago. Dr. Heather Wilson was there, and I asked how we could work together a little bit better in her eyes. And she mentioned how the law requires members of this committee to be kept fully and currently informed of the intelligence activities of the United States. That's this committee. It's not every member of Congress. It's not the general public, and we all get that. But for this committee, it has to happen, and we need to insist upon that. And we also need to insist on our side that we engender trust to the seriousness of this committee and the work that we have to do and our own professional responsibilities in this relationship. And I think we're at that point. I really do with this committee right now. But we have the responsibility of oversight as well as working with all of you. And in my mind, there can be no walls between us. There can be walls around us at times. There needs to be walls around us at times. But there should be no walls between us if we're going to be effective. And we really can only move at the speed of trust. And I feel like I've developed relationships with all of you. It's been very helpful to the work that we do on this committee, and I thank you for that. Sometimes we can do a little bit more. And so, Director Haynes, I know this committee has written you a few times about who the intelligence community consulted with regarding the assessment of COVID-19 and its origins. Now, I chair the select subcommittee on the pandemic. All things with the pandemic and origins of COVID is important. And even yesterday in our hearing, every person on the committee, bipartisan, and every one of our panelists said finding the origins of COVID is an important project we need to continue and try to get to. And we can go into all those reasons. Why is it important, though, that for us to have this information and to know who the experts are? And, if we hear something like, it's our policy not to tell you on the committee who we spoke to, that's a problem. And it is important who you spoke to, because if who someone spoke to may have some personal bias or other agenda or political bias towards their conclusions. I mean, look, you've seen all these agencies with different conclusions. Well, why is that? Well, part of that may be depending upon who they talk to. So that is important that we get that information. And it's my understanding that the DOE would be willing to show us their underlying report, especially their updated report. But since ODNI owns the assessment, you'd have to approve that. So what I'm going to ask is that you would approve that and get us that information so that we can move forward. And I would hope that we can also get the information of actually who they talk to. It's important to this committee. It's important to the country. So I guess I'm just asking, would you commit to that at this time?
Thank you so much, Congressman. I know this is an issue that we've talked about before, right. And I think, first of all, on the DOE assessment, absolutely, I suspect it would have to be in classified form. I'm sure it's a classified report, but more than happy to share any final assessment that they've done if they're comfortable with it. I can't imagine myself standing in the way, so I don't know what that is, but we'll look into that and get back to you quickly. I think on the more general issue, let me just put a few things down. I think one problem for us is that we obviously want to be able to consult with outside expertise, including academics, a variety of other experts in fields related to COVID-19, but also a series of other areas that we work in. And often for many academics that we consult with, it's not something they do not want to be known as consulting with the intelligence community. It creates challenges for them.
If I may, I'm talking about in a classified setting.
No, let me finish.
And this is important, and this is important to the work, because we do need to know who they are and how they came to their assessments.
Congressman, let me just finish. I'll explain. So often what will happen is they will, for example, be willing to participate in a conference or something along those lines that's not for us, and they will do it under Chatham House rules that says that we can't attribute essentially anything to them specifically, even though we can bring the information out. That's an example of the kind of challenge that we end up in. So we can't, what we have been able and willing to provide in classified or in unclassified, and we've given this obviously, is basically the backgrounds of various experts that we've consulted with, the actually published information that we've relied on, and answer any questions about how we got to a conference.
Director, I'm going to need you to conclude.
Got it. And I'll just finish with the last thing, which is that if there's anybody, sir, that you want us to talk to that you feel like we haven't, I commit to you that we will absolutely take those names and we will ensure that we are consulting with them as well.
We're just trying to do the best job we can to, in the future, be able to predict a pandemic, prepare for it, to protect the American lives, and to prevent one.